Hello everyone, and I hope this time the sound is coming through. Otherwise, I am in trouble again. If anyone is there. I've hopefully also fixed the chat box, but I have no idea if that's gonna work either. Oh boy. Well, I mean, I wasn't doing this quickfire quiz fig because... Oh, yeah, I mean, I set it low because it was loud for me, but... I mean, I'm just gonna go through the current batch of... I'm gonna go as far as I can through the current batch of questions that I've been posting for the past year or so. And hopefully I can do it within the hour. Probably not, but hopefully. So, I mean, I started this whole thing because I just saw that I could and thought I'd drum up some activity. And I started with the question about about what, I mean, anyone who's watched the third series on the Anjou dynasty, this was one of the smaller plot points on the who was the Doge of Venice who was condemned to the damnation of memory and decapitation on the charge of treason for attempting to overthrow the established order of the Republic of San Marco, that is to say, the Serene Republic of Venice. Now, Enrico Dandolo is the Doge that is behind the... yes, yes, anyone who wants to go and solve the quiz now, they can do it. Let's see if... Let me just get out of... Oh, okay, the chat box looks okay today. Probably could still increase the font later, but... Alright. Now, Enrico Dandolo was the Doge that was behind the Third Crusade... behind the Fourth Crusade and all the nonsense that went on. Otto Orseolo is one of the Doges that is behind... Otto Orseolo is the father of one of the previous kings of Hungary, Peter Orseolo. And is one of the Doges that was behind the first Venetian attempts to conquer Dalmatia. Doge Francesco Foscari is, I think, the longest serving Doge in the history of Venice, and Doge Marino Faliero hic est locus Marini Falietro decapitato pro criminibus was the Doge that attempted to overthrow the order of the Republic of Venice in 1355 and was condemned to damnation of memory. Everything he ever did was erased from history, and the only memory of him is, well, what his opponents say and the little black shroud in the Great Hall of the Republic of the Grand Council of Venice. And of the 43 people, most people got it right. Then we go to the next question on the thing, which was how many King Stephens did Croatia and Hungary have together? And that gets us to 8 Steves, and here's the full list of how... well, the full list of how we got there, because it started counting off from we have 3 King Stevens in Croatia, counting also Stephen Držislav, and then we have 5 King Stevens in Hungary. And when you put them together, that is, of course, 8. For anyone incapable of doing math. And most people got this wrong. Which I can't blame them, because it's a bit hard to calculate, though it's far simpler than in some other cases where there were, fortunately there weren't any Stevens that interlocked on these fronts, so there was no simultaneous Stephen with two different numbers. This is, of course, the famous anecdote on Napoleon getting attacked by bunnies, and I'm not surprised that a lot of people got that right. The story is basically that Marshal Berryer procured domesticated bunnies instead of wild bunnies for a hunt, and the wild bunnies confused Napoleon with the guy who was supposed to bring the lettuce. And they stormed they stormed the emperor for it. Oh, this was when I was still trying to be a bit more creative with the questions, which does tend to get exhausted, but the Battle of Agincourt and the Battle of Balaclava happened on the same day, the 25th of October. And they are both commemorated in the great aspects of English verse. And most people, of course, got that right, because I think this was quite a few hints dropped in this case. We move on to the this is one of those questions that I get the lyrics stuck in my head and I just want to. This is more for me wanting to write the lyrics in the explanation and then form the question that leads to that explanation rather than thinking of the question first. And this was one of the first questions that really went big, and I'm guessing it's because it had the word Arizona in the name and it just caught on. Okay, Corral. Okay, Corral. This is from the second series, where it's one of the things that's mentioned that King Bela III got named. When he was not King Bela III, when he was still heir apparent to the Kingdom of Hungary and heir apparent to the Empire of Byzantium, he was heir presumptive to the Empire of Byzantium at that point. He was given the name Alexios in Byzantium by the Byzantine emperor, and would have kept it if the emperor didn't get a new Byzantine bouncing baby boy born to him. But this was a point in the videos, and most people got it right, although it is, of course, understandable that some haven't. How many female monarchs did Hungary and Croatia have in their history? And the answer is 2, because the 2 queens, both Mary d'Anjou and Maria Theresa, were during the era of the Union, and there were no queens before or after. Queens that reigned as monarchs in their own right, and they weren't queens because they were titled as kings, because it was a legal point that a queen could never run the Kingdom of Hungary, but nobody ever said the king had to be a man. So officially, King Mary d'Anjou and Queen Mary d'Anjou and Queen Maria Theresa are officially titled as kings of Croatia and Hungary and not queens, although they are most often referred to as queens. Well, Maria Theresa is also referred to as empress because, well, that's a higher title. On the 29th of October 1918, the Sabor of the Triune Kingdom of Dalmatia, Croatia, and Slavonia declared the severing of ties with the Austrian Empire and the Hungarian Kingdom and its decision to join the formation of the new polity known as the State of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs. That month-long state in November that existed in the end of October and the November of 1918 during the whole chaos. And we'll probably get to that history at some point, but it is most often forgotten about outside of, well, regional history. It's emphasized here in regional history, but it's most often omitted in external histories like English, American, wider European history. They tend to skip right to the Kingdom of Yugoslavia and, well, the Kingdom of Slovenes, Croats, and Serbs, because, well, there's no need for nuances in the grander narrative of that. So that tends to get forgotten about there. One of my old attempts at advertising that didn't go anywhere. Now, there were a lot of hints in this entire question as to what I was aiming at. Maybe it's the fact that it was question 9. In what year did the Roman army suffer what was considered to be its worst defeat, the Battle of Teutoburg Forest? And it's 9 AD, and it's the 9th question, and everything is revolving around the number 9. And it is that famous story of, after hearing about the defeat, the Emperor Augustus was smashing his head against a marble wall, screaming, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions." And the numbers of those legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, were never used again in Roman history because they were thought cursed almost. That is the size of the embarrassment of the defeat at Teutoburg Forest. Was it Teutoburg? No, that's not Teutoburg. It is Teutoburg. This is one of those which doesn't belong in this group questions, and one of them I messed up badly, but this one isn't it. It's which one doesn't belong in this group. We have Heian, Kyoto, Saikyo, and Edo is of course the name of Tokyo, while the others were names of older names for Kyoto, or, well, castle names in the Kyoto region, which was the older capital of Japan. Why did the fate of Europe and much of the world in the 1690s depend on the life and death of a young Prince Joseph Ferdinand Leopold of Bavaria? And because he was the compromised heir to the Spanish throne. Because King Charles II of von Habsburg of Spain had not conceived an heir for, well, very obvious reasons when you start to even glance at a summary of his history. But the Bavarian child, as he was referred to sometimes, was the compromise candidate between the French, between the French candidate and the other Austrian candidate, between Charles VI, well, the future Emperor Charles VI, and the future King Philip of Spain at that point. When Joseph Ferdinand Leopold of Bavaria died, he was still basically a child, and many suspected foul play at that point. But it was one of those, the moment he died, it was almost certain that the entirety of Europe was going to war, because the entire inheritance of the Spanish overseas empire was at stake at that point. And it's said that upon his death, King Louis XIV of France, well, sometimes after his death, King Louis XIV of France basically said, "And now the Pyrenees cease to exist," because he thought that his candidate would affirm a union between France and Spain. Bela IV was king of Croatia during which of these historical events, which is of course the Mongol invasion of Europe, which is well, what he was famous for is running away from the Mongols and giving a bunch of rights to several towns and cities along the route of his flight. That's also a rather well-known event, because now the Third Crusade is, of course, the Third Crusade. The Fourth Crusade is, well, the Fourth Crusade is a completely different story and doesn't really doesn't technically feature the Hungarian king a lot, because that's the reign of one of the Stephens, and then gets succeeded by Andrew II. And the Avignonian captivity is, of course, the events where the Pope was where the popes were kept in Avignon by the kings of France. What was the name of the personal union between the kingdoms of Denmark, Norway, and Sweden that lasted from 1397 to 1523, which is, of course, the Kalmar Union, because it was concluded in the town of Kalmar. Things are sometimes very simple in history. In which of the South American countries was Simon Bolivar born? Which is, of course, Venezuela, and Bolivia is, of course, named after Simon Bolivar. Well, Simon José Antonio de la Santísima Trinidad Bolivar Palacios Ponte y Blanco, Presidente Dictador of Gran Colombia, President and Dictator of Gran Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Panama, and Bolivia. What was the Leaning Tower of Pisa? And I got told by several people that they knew this because they had it as a question on the child set of of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, the board game, which is, of course, a bell tower. During the Second World War, what was the melody that was used by the BBC's Radio Londres to signal coded messages? Which was dun 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 dun, and in Morse code the dun 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 is V, and V was used as V for victory, V for victoire. Who does not belong in this group? It's between Prince Charles Maurice Talleyrand Perigord, Prince Clemens Wenzel Nepomuk von Metternich Viennaberg Zubelstein, and Lord Robert Shaw Marquess of Londonderry Viscount Castlereagh, or Prince Otto von Bismarck, Duke of Lauenburg, Count of Bismarck Schoenhausen, which was of course Prince von Bismarck, who was not in attendance at the Conference of Vienna, primarily because of being in nappies at the time. They would have called him, but it was nappy time at that point. What was the name of the alliance that assembled in 1495 to attempt to push the French king Charles VIII out of Italy? Now we're at the point where I think I was... Well, it was at the point where I had released videos on the Italian wars, and of course that was the League of Venice in 1495. It was late before and after there would be... Before there was the Italian League that was assembled to theoretically push any invaders out, but that didn't last. The League of Cambrai was a league formed against Venice, and the League of Cognac was a league led by France against Charles V of... Emperor Charles V in the 1520s. True or false? In Zagreb, Croatia, there is a cannon is fired every day exactly at noon, which is of course true. And I sort of gave up on these true or false questions because I didn't really see a point of it. And yes, every day from 1877, a cannon shot is fired from the Lotršćak Tower in Zagreb in exactly at noon, and it was a cannon shot in order to signal to all of the bell ringers in the vicinity of the town to start ringing the bells at the exact same time. Well, it's roughly the exact same time. Who was the French commander who signed the armistice agreement on the 11th of November 1918 with Germany? Marshal Joseph Joffre, Marshal Philippe Pétain, Marshal Ferdinand Foch, Marshal Charles de Gaulle. Well, Charles de Gaulle wasn't a marshal yet. Marshal Joffre was, well, not there. Marshal Pétain was also not there, but Marshal Ferdinand Foch was the generalissimo and top allied commander of the Entente forces, and he got to sign the armistice agreement. And he was also one of the people who said that the Peace of Versailles wasn't a peace, but an armistice for 20 years, and he was right almost to the day. What killed the young Alexander of Greece? Now, King Alexander of Greece was seen sort of as this compromise candidate between the conflicting factions in Greece in the early 20th century, and his death because of a monkey bite is one of the great tragedies of modern Greek history. And one of the things that, well, it's one of the things, the little accidents that can throw history out for a loop. And most people got it right because it's probably the famous story, but I'm not surprised they did go for a few other options. How many language scripts are written on the Rosetta Stone? That is to say 3. It is written in the Egyptian hieroglyphs, Egyptian Demotic, and Ancient Greek. Although some have said that there is also a 4th script on the Rosetta Stone, which is Latinic English, which says, I think, property of the British Army or something, or seized by the British Army at some point. On the side. Which Chinese dynasty founded the Forbidden City in Beijing, which was, of course, the Ming, and most people got that right. What church is the official cathedral of the Bishop of Rome, more commonly known as the Pope? Now, the hint here should have been the Archbasilica of St. John Lateran, because the others are just simple basilicas. But of course, I can't really blame people for choosing St. Peter's because it's more famous, but the hint should have been the Archbasilica, because and it is known as the Mother Church, and it is the official seat of the Pope in his capacity as the Bishop of Rome. Which King Bela of Hungary and Croatia is also known as the Blind, which is of course Bela III, which people would have known if they'd seen the series. And he was blinded by his uncle King Koloman as punishment for the conspiracies of Bela's father Almos. Which Queen of England began her reign on November 17, 1558? Which is, of course, Queen Elizabeth I, and I just expected people to know this because, well, Elizabeth I is the most famous, is probably the most famous of the queens out of this choice. What European country was first to adopt the modern constitution? And that is European country. That is, a modern constitution is a complete written document of the state, which is not constitutional documents that we would have in other countries and still do have in the United Kingdom, where the entire set of the constitutions is every law that's ever been passed in the history of the country. And there are some more important laws and some important others, but the first country to have a written constitution after the United States is Poland-Lithuania. And that constitution was passed on the 3rd of May, and it was passed quite sneakily by its proponents, as they made sure that most of the opponents of the constitution were not present at the time. What was the name of the World War II Allied deception operation that preceded the D-Day landings? That is, of course, the old operation about the inflated tanks and the fake army under General Patton and all that jazz, which is Operation Fortitude. And all the other answers are just plays on the word fortitude or close enough synonyms. Who was the first European to explore to sail around the Cape of Good Hope and reach the Indian Ocean? That was, of course, Bartolomeo Diaz. Columbus, of course, went to America. Vasco da Gama sailed all the way around the Cape and all the way to India, which was after Diaz. And Prince Henry the Navigator, who was a Portuguese prince, made it to the Azores. Or, well, made it to the Azores and the Canary Islands, I think. Or even Cape Verde, but I think he discovered the Azores. Question 30. Which one does not belong in this group? Bohemia, Moravia, Silesia, or Slavonia? Slavonia is, of course, not part of the lands of the Czech crown, but is, and that's why it's the odd one out here. Which of these did not happen at the 1904 Olympics? This was a fun one to write, because I only had to make up one fact. And that was I only had to make up the correct answer, which was the third place runner fell off a bridge and was carried part of the way by a river, which is as much as probable as everything else that happened in that race, which is utter insanity. Most people got that right, because I think the race is quite famous, but also we're dealing with low numbers. The famous Largo Factotum Figaro aria comes from which opera, which is of course Rossini's Barber of Seville, but is far more famous, I think, to a lot of us, but when it was performed by Tommasino Caticasaza in The Cat Above and the Mouse Below in 1964. Which chivalric order was founded by King Sigismund von Luxembourg? This, of course, plays a big part in the Sigismund von Luxembourg series, and that is the Order of the Dragon, which is also the origin of the name for Dracula, who inherited that title from his father, who was part of the Order of the Dragon. And, of course, Dracul, Dracula, and so on. Which country was Luxembourg in personal union with from 1815 to 1890? And that is the Netherlands. The union ended upon the succession of Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands in 1890 because Luxembourg still held on to the Salic laws until about 20 years later. The construction of the Colosseum in Rome was completed under which Roman emperor? And that is, of course, Emperor Titus. And I'm not surprised. I think the construction was sort of begun under Tiberius, but then finished under Titus. It's sometimes hard to keep track of when the Roman monuments were built, because they are various megalomaniac projects conducted by the emperors at various points. How long was the term of the prince or rector of the Republic of Ragusa, Dubrovnik? And that ties back into the first question, because the sort of governance of Dubrovnik becomes independent of Venice in 1355, and they might have chosen the 1-month term for the rector in order to not allow a Doge Marino Faliero situation to happen in Dubrovnik. So keeping the prince to a one-month term and keeping his duties very, very limited and limited in movement to the rectoral palace was a way to keep the executive under very, very tight control. Which of these 19th century monarchs reigned the longest? And that is, of course, Emperor Franz Joseph of Austria. Most people have chosen here Queen Victoria, which is perhaps understandable, but Emperor Franz Joseph has 4 years on her in terms of longest reign. What year was the Panama Canal opened? 1914. Most people got that right, because that is quite a memorable year considering everything that happens. When Croats, Hungarians, Serbs say Bech or Bech, what city are they referring to? Which is, of course, Vienna. Or Wien. The famous TV series MASH is set during which war? It is, of course, the Korean War, and most people got that, and the vast majority of people got that right, even though it is arguably a very, very thinly veiled jab at the Vietnam War. Well, the culture is very much of the Vietnam War. Which does not belong in this group of ancient battles? Battle of Marathon, Battle of Issus, Battle of Granicus, Battle of Gaugamela, and that is, of course, Battle of Marathon, because the other three are battles under Alexander the Great. And you can see most people got that right. Who was the famous 19th century French chef who cooked for Napoleon, Tsar Alexander of Russia, the Prince Regent, and later King George IV of the United Kingdom, and many others? Now, I didn't expect a lot of people to get this right, but most did, although I understand why Escoffier was chosen, because he is probably a more famous chef than Carême. And, well, Chef Boyardee also, but that is quite a obvious red herring. But yeah, Carême is considered to be one of the first big private chefs. And the entire restaurant culture that we experience today is sort of derived from a lot of these pre-revolutionary chefs or their assistants starting to open up restaurants because, well, the French people decided to fire their aristocracy in the 1790s. Where was the first traffic light semaphore installed on December 9th, 1868? And as most things are in the 19th century, London would be the correct guess. The European Revolution of 1848 are also known under what name? And it is, of course, the Springtime of Nations. The Winter Wonderland of Nations. I like being silly in these. What feature-length film began the era of the talkies? That is, of course, the jazz singer Val Jolson. In it, where the tapes for audio and video are synced up, and there is no need for an external source of sound, which was like a gramophone or a piano or somebody reading behind the screen, which was various things that were tried. Which of the medieval monarchs was crowned at Christmas Day, 25th of December? And it was all of them. Emperor Charlemagne probably being the most famous. Stephen of Hungary, another one. William I of England also. All of them crowned on Christmas Day, which is... I mean, this is a bit unfair because, I mean, all of them are the correct answer. In Croatia and a few other countries, what is planted on St. Lucy's Day, the 13th of December? It is a small bowl of wheat, because it came from a tradition of testing this year's wheat in the future. Well, for the future year. And see if the harvest will be good, if the wheat was healthy and everything. In German history, the year 1888 is known as the year of the Free Eights. The year of the Free Emperors, the year of the Free Weddings, the year of the Free Wars, which is, of course, the year of the Free Emperors, because Emperor Wilhelm I dies in that year. Emperor Frederick III, well, Emperor Frederick III succeeds William I and dies in the same year, and then Wilhelm II succeeds him also later in that year, succeeds his father also later in that year. Which island does not belong in this group? And this is the one I messed up. Because these are, in my mind, I was putting in islands that were connected to Napoleon, and Ibiza was the only one, but also St. Helena is the only one not in the Mediterranean, and I sincerely apologize for this question. What did a group of Chinese farmers discover in 1974 while digging a well? And that is the Terracotta Army. And that is probably a far more famous story than I expected, because about 3,000 people almost answered with 92% correct. The Medici banking clan rose in prominence in which Italian city? Which is, of course, Florence. And again, overwhelming knowledge there from a lot of people. What was the nickname given to King William IV, which is, of course, the Sailor King, because he was in the Royal Navy in his youth and, well, continued having very much a fondness for the Navy later on in his life. 2025 marks which anniversary of the founding of the Croatian Kingdom, and that is the 1100th, which is the year that is considered to be the founding of the Croatian Kingdom. That is to say, the assumed date of the previously assumed date of King Tomislav I's coronation, which is, well, traditionally considered, which is 925, because for some reason we've decided to connect several events together, and 19th century historians decided to, well, manipulate sources a bit. And we got a bit of a mess on when we got a tradition that is still being followed through, even though it is not, even though it does not have the soundest of foundations. When was the release of the first Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoon? It was 1949. I mean, these are very close years, but these were the Latin phrases used in that iteration of the cartoon. After the naval battle in Massatiera in 1915, Tirpitz came swimming out of the sinking hull of the SMS Dresden and was rescued by a crew of the HMS Glasgow, who adopted Tirpitz as the ship's mascot. And what animal was Tirpitz? And Tirpitz was a pig. And I think people were expecting a cat, because there are several famous cats that served on battleships. But Tirpitz was indeed a pig that was meant to be food for the crew of the SMS Dresden. Later on, Tirpitz was awarded the Iron Cross by the HMS Glasgow crew for his bravery, and was kept as a pet in the Whale Island Gunnery School until he got too old and, well, got stuffed and is now hanging in the Imperial War Museum. And I hope to see Tirpitz one day. How many times was Mexico an empire? That is in the 19th century sense. Twice. I got called out on this several times because the Aztecs are known as the Mexica people, and the Aztec Empire can also be considered to be the Mexican Empire. But this was in the Mexico as the Mexican state and the 19th century Mexican empires. And a lot of people got this right. Well, the majority of people got this right. Operations Barclay, Waterfall Animals, and Mincemeat were Allied intelligence operations during the Second World War with the purpose of convincing the Axis command that the Allies will definitely not invade Sicily. So these are just a series. Like, Mincemeat gets all the glory, but it was the combined effort of all of these operations that threw the Germans off the scent. But Mincemeat is the most audacious, ambitious, and ridiculous of the plans, and it's a great story that we do not know what effect. We do not know if the effect that it had is as great as it's told, because so many things were going on. Which was the last Japanese shogunate? That was the Tokugawa shogunate, the official Japanese shogunate, although some can argue about later periods in Japanese history. Which war animal did King Pyrrhus of Epirus bring on his invasion to Italy in 280 BC? And that was the elephant. The Greeks shall come against thee, the conqueror of the east. Beside him stalks into battle the huge ground-shaking beast, the beast on whom the castle with all its guards doth stand, the beast who hath between his eyes a serpent for a hand. Which, that is from the Lays of Ancient Rome by Thomas Babington Macaulay and the Prophecy of Capys. That is the less famous of the lays, the most famous being, of course, Horatius at the Gates. Horatius at the Bridge. The old city center of the split Croatia was retirement palace of which Roman emperor? That is Diocletian, the only emperor that really got to retire, and although he still didn't get to die in his sleep, peacefully in his sleep. I think, at least. I might be misremembering. Which monument did Napoleon order to be built to commemorate the Battle of Austerlitz? That is, of course, the Arc de Triomphe. The Pont d'Austerlitz was not built, but was renamed at some point. But the Arc de Triomphe was meant to commemorate Austerlitz, and it has all of the names of the participants inscribed on it. And all of the heroes of the Empire, and later. What was the name of the medieval European trading alliance that connected many cities in Northern Europe? That is, of course, the Hanseatic League. What is the Croatian parliament called? That is to say, the Sabor. This is... I was quite disappointed in this because... well, I expected a bit better, but... I understand that it's not everybody's question. How did the Mongols pass the Great Wall of China during the conquest of China in the 13th century? This is a bit of a stretch on my part because various things like this, of all of these, did happen, but the most famous is going around the sections of the wall. How many floors did the first skyscraper have when it was built? The first skyscraper had 10 floors. Ooh, that was very high at the time. I think the first building with an elevator had 4 floors. Who is considered to have founded the Zulu Empire? That is, of course, Shaka Zulu, and a lot of the great majority of people got that right. What is the name of the former imperial palace complex in the center of Vienna? That is the Hofburg. Schönbrunn is the palace complex on the outskirts of Vienna, or what used to be the outskirts of Vienna. How many red-white fields does the current Croatian coat of arms have? It is, say, 25. It is a 5x5 grid, although you get the various combinations throughout history. The Agreement of Plombières, made in 1815 between Emperor Napoleon III of France and the Chief Minister Count of Cavour, of the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia, agreed in exchange French military support against Austria. Kingdom of Sardinia would give France the territories of Savoy and Nice, which was, of course, which was a very complex question with a lot of caveats to it. And there's a reason why I phrased the whole thing that way, and if anyone can guess it, that will... well, if anyone can guess it, you'll get a cookie at some point. Probably not from me, but you'll get a cookie. The Athenian Parthenon throughout its history has been used as a place of worship, but what other use had made a significant impact of the building? And I think the phrasing there was a very big hint, because it was used as gunpowder storage. Again, a great majority of people got that right. In April of 1912, Harriet Quinn became the first woman to fly across the English Channel, although the Atlantic's the one that surprised me, because I thought that one would be very well known. Yes, cookies. I thought everybody would know this was Earhart, but I thought the Grand Canyon might get a few more. I mean, it did get a few more votes. The Canary Islands are named after what animal? And this is the first. This is one of those questions where I expected to happen what has happened. The Canary Birds were named after the Canary Islands. The Canary Islands were named after dogs. Canarie, Canis, Canarius, Canariae. That is the way the phrasing was formed, because Plutarch and Pliny the Elder wrote about an island with lots of large dogs on it. And whether or not the dogs had gone extinct, or if they meant some sort of seal or sea dog sort of animal on it, but it is derived from dog, not canary. What was the name of the decoding machine used in Germany during the Second World War? Enigma. That is honestly Easy Street, and I am thankful nobody chose Puzzle. I should really do more comics, because I do have a few ideas, but I just don't have the time to draw them. What was the capital of the Federal Republic of Germany between 1949 and 1990, aka West Germany? And that was Bonn. And there are several theories as to why it was chosen, and the most hilarious and funniest one is it's because it was close to Chancellor Adenauer's house. What was the name of the fortified trading post established by European traders in the foreign lands during the medieval early modern periods? And that would be the factory, Factoria, which was a sort of storage depot, fortified storage depot and trading port all in one, where Europeans would would sell their wares to natives and vice versa, and could be protected in those factories. How was Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte related to Emperor Napoleon I Bonaparte? He was, of course, his uncle. Although this one doesn't surprise, because that is how you would usually expect things to go. What was the official language of Croatia until 1847? And that was Latin. Latin was the official language in Hungary until 1790, and then, until 1790, and maybe a bit later, but that was when Hungarian gets a big push, and then Croatian is first. Latin remains the official language in Croatia until the 1847, where Croatian is adopted as the official language. That is almost a very delayed response to, probably not a delayed response, but a very big change in mentality on how to approach facing pressure from Buda to enforce the Hungarian language across the union of the two kingdoms, across the realm of St. Stephen. The Japanese attack in which port started the Russo-Japanese War? That is, of course, Port Arthur, and that is quite famous. Tientsin was the port of very close to Beijing, and it plays a big role a few years before during the Boxer Rebellion. Canton is in South China. That is basically where Hong Kong is, and Pearl Harbor is not attacked by the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War. Where did the Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies, established in 1695 and allegedly backed by almost half of the monetary capital of the Kingdom of Scotland, attempt to establish a colony? And they attempted to establish a colony in Panama. There is also another, I think it was a Welsh colony in Tierra del Fuego that might have confused people here. But not only did the Company of Scotland trading to Africa and the Indies attempt to establish a colony in Panama, they attempted to establish it in the very inhospitable Darien Gap, which was very, very unsuccessful. And the Darien Gap is one of those places that to this day is very much uninhabited and devoid of infrastructure because of how deadly it is. In 1721, Johann Sebastian Bach finished writing a series of concertos under the title Six Concertos for Several Instruments. They are, of course, known as the Brandenburg Concertos, because they were made for the Margrave of Brandenburg. Yes, the very perfect place for the colony. Which event begins or directly precedes the Three Kingdoms era of Chinese history? This history, that is, they say, the end of the Han Dynasty. That is the Yellow Turban Rebellion, the famous beginning of every story of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Not surprising that people got that majority right. How far did the Swedish ship Vasa travel on her maiden voyage? No, Commissar, no, they didn't. And we are not going to quote the completely historically accurate games that Shadow plays from time to time, or any of our history. How far did the Swedish ship Vasa travel on her maiden voyage? Now, I understand 10 kilometers is probably in line with what people are willing to give grace, but it was in fact 1 kilometer. The Vasa was so filled with decorations and things, and the moment it started till its gun ports started leaking and it started taking on water. We are not going to talk about the historical merits of Kessen 2. What coincided with the newly ascended President Truman's 61st birthday in 1945? That was, of course, Victory in Europe Day. It was a most enjoyable birthday for President Truman. Which country did Kaiser Wilhelm II flee to after his abdication at the end of the First World War? That is, of course, the Netherlands at the Doorn estate. Huisdorn. What are the names of the two factions in conflict across the Apennine Peninsula from the 12th to the 14th century? That is, of course, the Guelphs and the Ghibellines. The Whigs and Tories are the two factions of the British Parliament in the 18th, 19th century. The Optimates and the Populares are one of the two out of three alleged factions in ancient Rome, which is, of course, this is not mentioning the Boni. The Huguenots and Cathars are the heretic sect, well, heretic and Protestant and heretic sects in France. Yi Sun-sin, the Korean War hero who played a major role in fighting off the Japanese invasion. What modern English military rank is usually used? That is, of course, Admiral. That is Admiral Yi of Korea. Mathematician Leonhard Euler established graph theory in 1736 by explaining the lack of solution to what problem? The 3 towers of Dusseldorf, the 5 hills of Munich, the 7 bridges of Königsberg, and the 9 gardens of Potsdam. And it's, of course, the 7 bridges of Königsberg, because it was impossible to cross all of them, to cross all of the bridges and go to every island by crossing every bridge once. And to explain that, Euler developed what is known as graph theory. The University of Bologna is said to have been founded in what year? That is 1088. It is allegedly founded in that year, as are most universities, allegedly founded in their founding years. In the Second World War, during Operation Overlord, which of the Normandy landing beaches was assigned to the Canadian forces? That was, of course, Juno. Gold and Sword beaches were given primarily to beaches, the Omaha and Utah beaches to the United States. Although not achieving all objectives within the expected timeline, the Canadian landing on Juno Beach are by some historians deemed the most successful of the landings of that day, starting operations the latest but going the furthest distance than either the Brits or the Americans. Yes, Hoi 4 has taught a lot of history to a lot of people. I'm still thinking about how to even start explaining Hoi 4 in a historical context, but I might try a stream one day. One day soon, hopefully. Excuse me? Which Germanic tribe that thundered through the ancient Western Roman Empire settled and established the kingdom of the Iberian Peninsula? That is, of course, the Visigoth. The Visigoth kingdom. It was one of the forces of the ancient world that very suddenly collapse to the Bedouin Arab invasion from the south. Almost very unexpectedly collapses when in the 7th, 8th centuries, the 7th, 8th centuries, the papacy, the 7th century, the papacy is looking for some way to reestablish connections throughout Europe. It was generally believed that the Visigoth kingdom would be the place where Europe Christianity would be revitalized and remade. It is the christening of Clovis that is considered one of the most that is the Frankish king Clovis, is one of the most out of the blue, unexpected events in European history that shapes it in a most unexpected way. Like, nobody expects the Franks to be the ones to attempt to reestablish Europe and be the foundation of what we know as medieval Europe to this day. It was thought that that would either come from the Visigoth kingdom or maybe even Ireland and the British Isles, but it is the Franks that happened, and when you look at the situation in Europe, that is extremely unexpected. Which of these wars did not end in the Treaty of Paris? That was the War of 1812. And not many people got that right. It is still the majority, but all of these other wars ended with a Treaty of Paris. The War of 1812 ended with the Treaty of Ghent. How long was the Model T in production, the Ford Model T in production? And that is the 19 years. Very unexpected 19 years, and it did not change its design much in those 19 years. And due to those 19 years of production, there were still parts to maintain the Model T for the next 20, 30 years in circulation. What was the name of the 19th century Italian secret society of liberal and nationalist revolutionaries? That is, of course, the Carbonari, because they used to gather in the forest near the charcoal burners and would use... well, they didn't gather near the charcoal burners. They would sort of use fire as a signal for their meetings, but because the charcoal burners, the Carbonari, would also burn charcoal, nobody would suspect that something weird was going on there. What was the birthplace of Jeanne d'Arc, Joan of Arc, Joan of Orleans, and that was the village of Domremy. Not Arc or Orleans. And a lot of people got this wrong, because many people expected it to be Orleans. She participated in the liberation of Orleans, but was not born there. For most of the late 19th century and early 20th century, the Brazilian economy was predominantly based on the production and export of coffee. Brazil was flooded with coffee. It was the main export, the main thing that was grown, that was sold, that at point where the coffee prices crashed, people were trying to get rid of coffee in every way possible, even using coffee bricks as fuel. There was just so much coffee, and, well, Frank Sinatra has that famous song, "There's an awful lot of coffee in Brazil." And there still is an awful lot of coffee in Brazil, just not as much as before, because they diversified the economy a bit. When were the first elections held for the National Diet of Japan? That was 1890, shortly after the promulgation of the Meiji Constitution. Not many people got this right, because many people, of course, answered the post-war Japan. Which of these does not belong in this group? Copenhagen, Nysa, Nile, and Trafalgar. Lisa, or the island of Vis, was one of the battles that Admiral Nelson did not participate in. Trafalgar should be the big hint as to what we're aiming. Nile and Trafalgar should be the big hint as to what we're aiming, and it just depends where people know it's that Copenhagen is the third one. Well, the middle one. The second triumvirate of ancient Roman Republic was formed by Gaius Octavius Augustus, Marcus Antonius, and who else? Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. And, I mean, like, these are all other great figures. Crassus was, of course, in the first triumvirate, which is probably why he got such a high score. Cicero was never part of a triumvirate. Brutus, well, I think Marcus Junius Brutus I'm aiming for... No, that's Marcus Julius, Marcus Lucius. Never mind. But yeah, it was Lepidus, and Lepidus was kind of meh. Hello. We're getting near the end of this, and I should have started probably an hour earlier, but it's all right. The Habsburg dynasty that ruled Portugal during the Iberian Union, Persian Union, Spain and Portugal, 1581 and 1640, is also known as the Philippine dynasty in Portugal because they were all named Philip. a lot of people got this. Well, majority of people got this right, but well, it's not unexpected why the other names were chosen, because I think it's sort of particular to Portuguese history, because you wouldn't name the dynasty like that just after the first name. The Croatian Ban Viceroy Ivan Mažuranić, who held the office from 1873 to 1880, was also considered to be the first what to hold the office. That is, the first commoner. He is known as the commoner Ban, or the Ban the commoner, and he did not come from the nobility when he ascended to the office, and the office stopped being the province of exclusively the nobility at that point, because this also comes after during the era of modernization. There were a lot of generals who were bans, there were a lot of clerics who were bans. Industrialists would have required us to have an industry at this point, enough of an industry to have an industrialist. Yes, I was planning on deductions, but it's sort of, I think I went for this question because it was question 100 and Mažuranić was on the 100 kuna note back in the day. So that's what's the inspiration behind this one. What emergency are the Dalmatian dogs most associated with? I got a couple complaints for this questions, but I mean, most commonly when we do see Dalmatian dogs, we see them associated with firefighters, although they are, at least in American media and probably other popular media, which has seeped through, but Dalmatian dogs are in a lot of other services. What was the name of the Paris city fortress prison stormed by a mob on the 14th of July 1789? I think I asked this in July, so that's why the question is. It was, of course, La Bastille. How long did the US Pony Express mail service operate for? And that is the grand 18 months of the Pony Express. It is one of the, 18 months is a lot longer than the usual story on the Pony Express, the usual story of the Pony Express is that somebody set off, and by the time they arrived in California, the telegraph wire had already been set up. Which is possible because the service takes time to, abolish, but that is the 18-month story of the Pony Express. It is still a bit legendary, but it was very short. What bird do the Australians lose a war to? That is, of course, the emu. No surprise, a lot of people got that right. Which Croatian city has a well-preserved ancient Roman amphitheater? And that is, of course, the Round Amphitheater, and that is the city of Pula. Split has the Diocletian's Palace and a lot of other rather Roman ruins in various state of preservation. Yeah, I didn't expect that either. I think most people associate ancient Roman things with Split, but most foreigners. When did the ruler from the Habsburg dynasty first sit on the throne of the Kingdom of Hungary? This was, of course, in the series, and that was in 1437 with King Albert von Habsburg. By the 1268 electoral reform, how many rounds were needed to elect the Doge of Venice? And that is 10 rounds, and I really want to do a video at some point on this, but that requires a bit greater amount of effort than I currently have available for a one-day video. Where does Shakespeare's Hamlet take place? That is, of course, Denmark. I'm not really surprised England gets second there, but it is... the famous line is, something is rotten in the state of Denmark. What additives... What addictive substance is named in the 19th century wars between China and two European powers? That is, of course, opium, and no surprise, a lot of people got that right. Which of these fictional heroes with secret identities is the oldest? The Scarlet Pimpernel. I didn't expect. I mean, I'm glad people know this, because the Scarlet Pimpernel is the precursor to all the other heroes that sort of have double identities, a public face and a not really a public face and a private face, but a buffoon and a hero. Huh. Yeah, I'll make a note of that. Let's see. These are all. Sorry about that. I'm sorry if the stream cut out there for a moment. Well, it cut out for me suddenly. Sorry. Well, it cut out on my screen. Anyway, let's continue. The ancient Numidian king Jugurtha is reported to have declared Rome was a city for sale. It's Augustus that says a city of marble. I've left it a city of marble. A city on fire is a funny one. A city with wolves is. We got the first spot, probably. I mean, it is sort of metaphorically correct, but Jugurtha did say it was a city for sale because he found it so easy to bribe Roman senators to get them to do what he wanted. How many capital cities does the Danube River flow through? And that is 4 cities, and, well, the majority of people got that right. What was the name of the private mercenary army that belonged to King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary and Croatia? That is, of course, the Black Army. We've covered that much in the series. What year did Venice purchase Dalmatia? That is, of course, the year of 1409. That was of course in the series, but yeah, these years are all very close together, so I'm not exactly surprised that people would choose them. How many times did Napoleon and Duke of Wellington face each other in the field of battle? And it was only once, only at the Battle of Waterloo. It was the last battle for both of them. Who composed the Violin Concerto of the Fourth Season? That was, of course, Vivaldi. What was the name of the World War II Allied plan for the invasion of the Japanese home islands? Operation Causeway, Operation Downfall, Operation Mailfist, or Operation Zipper? Operation Downfall was the set of operations to invade Japan had they not surrendered after the bombs dropped. Causeway was the invasion of Formosa, that is to say Taiwan. Mailfist and Zipper were for Malaysia and Singapore. I would say Waterloo is very much an Allied effort. When did and I think Wellington would even admitted that himself very often. When did the Crown of Castile and the Crown of Aragon that constituted early modern Spain unify into one country? That is, when did Spain become officially the centralized country of Spain? When did the union sort of cease? What we will see happen in Austria in the 19th century when all of the legal differences between the kingdoms are abolished and it all attempts to be part of one big state. That happened to Spain in 1716 when, after the War of the Spanish Succession and the Crown of Aragon, that is to say the Catalonians, had rebelled against King Philip and were on the Habsburg side, and he punished the Crown of Aragon by incorporating it with the Crown of Castile and centralizing Spain fully unofficially, because until then Spain was very much in the mold of other medieval kingdoms with separate entities for each kingdom. Sorry? The Ottoman Empire conquered either during the rule of which sultan? That is Sultan Selim. That was, of course, covered in the series. So Mehmed and Suleiman also, I mean, they're the big conquerors, so of course they would get some of the credit. And there would be confusion over that. Who doesn't belong in this group? Chico, Harpo, Groucho, Harpo, or Carl? I'm glad most people got the joke here. What is the second Sicily in the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which existed in southern Italy from 1816 until this 1861? That is the Kingdom of Naples, which was, for a lot of its history, derived as the Kingdom of Sicily, though we still know that, though we still colloquially always term it the Kingdom of Naples. Which of these important medieval constitutional documents that put into writing the power on the power of European monarch came about as a result of the rebellion against the king? That is both the Magna Carta and the Golden Bull. Again, these questions, every answer is sort of correct, but Magna Carta is far more famous. And that reflects that. Where does the French legislature meet in joint session? That is in Versailles. The Élysée Palace is the seat of the president. Versailles used to be the big, well, it was the royal palace, and the big meeting place for the legislature of the July monarchy was built in Versailles. I think it was during the July monarchy that it was built. Yeah, I think so. It could have been the Third... No, it was used during the Third Republic for... Oh no, it was... sorry. Yeah, the French National Assembly and the French Senate meet in Versailles for joint sessions, and it was established because of the events in Paris in 1870, that is to say, being besieged by Germans and having a domestic rebellion of the Paris Commune, making it very inaccessible, and they set up shop in Versailles. And the French legislature set up shop in Versailles for the Third Republic. Of course, you have to keep in mind that during that early days of the Third Republic, the majority in the French national legislature were monarchists. They were still offering the crown to various candidates, and France could have been a second or third kingdom if one of them had just accepted the crown and didn't refuse because of the point of the flag. The Japanese battleship Yamato was also affectionately referred to as a hotel, because it didn't move anywhere for a lot of its existence, and was the seat of, was mostly used as office space for admirals. What are the columns in the Spanish coat of arms called? The Pillars of Hercules. A lot of people got that right. The Rococo style belongs to which art period? That is the Baroque. That is the late stage of the Baroque. Sometimes it's referred to as its own style, but it is at the point where Baroque sort of splits off into more subdued classicism and then more extreme Rococo style. When was basketball invented? 1891. It was one of those very late invented sports that, has a lot of popularity today. The Croatian capital of Zagreb was once two towns, like many capitals, with a few other townships, were united in the city of Zagreb in 1850. What were they called? Now, I mentioned this several times for the city, that is Gradec and capital. Agram and Zagreb are the different name. Agram is the German name for Zagreb. Budapest is, of course, not, because that was the combination of Budapest and several other of its townships. And Lon and Don is just being silly. What year did an airship dirigible lighter than aircraft circumnavigate the globe for the first time? And I understand that this is... was surprising to people. I mean, it surprised me that 1929 is very late for a dirigible to make a trip around the world. But that was... Oh, I misspelled Hearst there. Okay, but it was a trip paid by William Randolph Hearst to basically advertise the his newspaper more than anything, and show off his power. But 1929 is very late for a round the world trip in a Zeppelin. What flower is associated with the Emperor of Japan? The chrysanthemum. The chrysanthemum throne is the same sort of way of referring to the Japanese monarchy, is a synonym for the Japanese monarchy. The ancient Minoan civilization was situated on which islands? That is, of course, Crete, and I'm glad a lot of people knew that. Which sci-fi franchise is older? It was a slow day for questions that day. But it is Star Trek. Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg. I think this was a deliberate trick question on my part because I wanted to see what the results would be. Now I got several complaints that he didn't nail the questions to the door, and these complaints, the question of where did Martin Luther nail the questions to the door is split between did he actually nail them or did he glue them, or there is never any mention that he did that. But then you have the argument that, well, what would it even be mentioned? Then would it even be mentioned because it was so common to post things on public doors when at the time? Now there's different arguments depending on whether or not a historian thinks that Luther wanted his 95 pieces to be published, or did somebody else want to publish them, and was he the agitator, or what did he want reconciliation? It very much depends on which interpretation of Luther you follow. But I don't see why the 95 Theses wouldn't have been posted at a very public door. The final objective of the Allied Operation Market Garden during the Second World War was to secure a bridge over the Rhine. These are all of the other famous rivers: Po in Italy, Kwai in Indochina, I think, or Malaysia. The Elbe, of course, and deeper in Germany. Not surprised a lot of people got that right. What was a spinning jenny? A textile manufacturing device. Revolutionized the manufacturing textiles in the 18th century. A lot of people got that right. How many times was Charles I, Robert of Hungary and Croatia, crowned as King of Hungary and Croatia? 3 times. I have 3 videos. I have 2 videos on that now. Dante Alighieri's famous epic poem, which describes his exploration of the afterlife inspired medieval Catholic theology, is known as the Divine Comedy. It was originally known just as the Comedy, and Boccaccio added the prefix divine to it the attribute divine to it later, and the 19th century realist writer Balzac would write his Human Comedy. That was a series, well, not a series, but a collection of novels studying the different aspects of the human condition, writing about different aspects of the human condition. His most famous works probably being Father Goriot in most of the world. How long was the 30 Years' War? This was a very fun question. This was more of an experiment to see how people would answer, and for a while, 30 years was below 33. Yesterday, December 7th, a date which will live in infamy, of course. Who was the first and to this day the best-selling singer of the classic Christmas song White Christmas, or I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas? That is, of course, Bing Crosby. Not surprised people would go for Frank Sinatra in second. What started the 1838 student riot in Edinburgh? It was a snowball fight, though I am not surprised people would think that was a pub closure. or a football game, or a controversial lecture at that point in time. King Alfonso XIII of Spain became king on the 17th of May 1886 at the age of 0, because he was born posthumously to his father Alfonso XII, who died in November of 1885, and people, instead of crowning his sister Princess Maria de la Mercedes of Asturias as queen, they waited for the queen to give birth and see if it was a boy. In Nashville, capital of the United North American state of Tennessee, there is a full-scale replica of the Parthenon. There are a lot of replicas of the Eiffel Tower. But it is indeed the Parthenon in Athens, and it started off in a similar form as a temporary exhibit, but grew to people wanted it to be there permanently. There are many documents that are called the Golden Bull. What does the Golden Bull refer to? That is, of course, the Golden Seal, or Bulla, Bulos, Bulla Aurea, and so on. How many republics had South Korea had? Now, South Korea had, to the surprise of many, and even me when I was when I found this out, it had 6 republics in the 20th century. 6 major changes of the constitution. And I mean, that surprised many, clearly, because 1, sure, 3, maybe, but 6, no way. What month, according to... This was, again, a very big trick question for me, because I knew this would happen. I knew people wouldn't go for the obvious answer. And I'm still proven right by that. The Decembrists were indeed in December. The Golden Bull of 1222 was considered to be the first written constitutional document of the medieval realm of St. Stephen, made up of 30 clauses, but was contained in the so-called Clause 31, and that is the right to rebellion. That is covered in the Andrew II video. The Great Automobile Race of 1908 saw drivers racing from Berlin to Paris. Okay, 1908. Cairo, I mean, they've done that. Cairo to Paris, more likely. Beijing to Paris was 1907. 1908 is New York to Paris, and New York to Paris the long way around. Across the United States to San Francisco, then across, they were meant to even go to Alaska, but conditions didn't permit that, so they sailed all the way to Vladivostok, and then through Russia to Moscow, St. Petersburg, down to Berlin, and then to Paris. And the Americans won. The Americans won because they had a lot of interchangeable parts, rather than the German team that had... rather than the German and Italian team that had custom-made parts. All of the free French cars didn't make it to Vladivostok. During their summit on the field of the Cloth of Gold in northern France, King Henry VIII of England and King Francis I of France allegedly engaged each other in what sport? And they engaged each other in wrestling. They did have archery contests, but they were on the same team. Wrestling, because it was agreed to that they would always be on the same team during the events. But then King Henry VIII challenges Francis I of France to a wrestling match, and Francis beats him, allegedly because Francis was a bit more nimble and faster. And we come to the last very easy question: what year was the first Formula 1 race? And that was 1950. There were prior automobile races that went by different formulas and rules, but 1950 was the one where they managed to have like a global rule set for a global World Series. And Formula 1 began 76 years ago and is still going. And that brings us to the end of this series of questions. I mean, I'm not surprised this is 1930 got a lot of got a bit more because their automobile racing was there was quite popular still before that. But that does bring us to the end of this. I think poll answers are public for everybody, so I'll be posting more questions in the weeks to come, but I just wanted to have this little stream to round out everything. Does anybody have any questions before we finish it off? Because this took a bit longer than I thought it would. Okay. But yeah, that is it for today. No problem. Thank you for coming. And well, I just wanted to go through the answers and let people see some of the interesting percentages. It just took a bit longer than I thought it would. And I was rushing by the end. But thank you all for coming, and see you next time. And I hopefully will have a bit more of a substantive stream. I have a few ideas, and it'll either be... Yeah, they're in the post things, and they show up more on the phone than they do on the computer. Yes. Okay. See you all later. See you next time, and bye bye.